Good afternoon. My name is Karen Engle, and I teach here at the University of Texas School of Law. And I'm also co-director of the Bernard and Audrey Rapoport Center for Human Rights and Justice. And it's my great pleasure, along with my co-director, Daniel Brinks, and Briscoe Center Executive Director, Don Carlton, to welcome you this afternoon to the launch event of the Michael Tigar Papers. Dean Farnsworth had hoped to welcome you today as well, but is unfortunately unable to do so. So he asked me to read the following message. Dear friends, I'm sorry that I cannot be with you myself on this occasion, but I'm grateful to have the brief chance to share my own pride and the pride of the law school in its association with the great Michael Tigar. Michael Tigar's over here, by the way, and a checkered shirt, in case you don't know. Michael was a very Michael was a very important part of this community for a long time and a source of inspiration as well as brilliant instruction to many generations of our students. More broadly, of course, he's been one of the most important human rights lawyers of our time and represents, actually he said of his times, because that covers more, I think, and represents courage and advocacy at its finest. It's a great honor that all of you have come, many from long distances, to help us pay tribute to Michael's career. And then he continues. It's also a great honor for us, through the collaboration between the Bernard and Audrey Rapoport Center for Human Rights and Justice and the Dolph Briscoe Center for American History, to serve as the home for Michael's papers and to ensure that they will not only be preserved, but will be available to be read for generations to come. Long may he continue to inspire fearless advocates everywhere. So I second that pride, and I also want to thank the many people who have participated in this project and in the program today. And I can't name everyone, because if I were to do that, it would mean I need to begin with Michael's mother and father, who first embarked on the Michael Tigar Project a few years ago. And I will tell you, though, that they do appear in the papers. But you will meet a number of people today and this evening who have played important roles in Michael's life and vice versa. And you can see in the program, I think it's on the back page or just inside, the list of people, and it's a pretty long list of people who have worked at the University of Texas on the project and the event today. Some of whom, the ones who are here, I'll call up for the launch that we'll have at the end of the evening's program. I do want to recognize two special people in the audience who I haven't yet had a chance to meet, so you're going to have to wave. Everyone, who is it? Michael Tigar's daughters, Elizabeth Tigar, hello, and Katie McQueen. So it's really special that you all are here, and it's special for us that we'll get to hear from you a little bit later as well. And I had hoped to be recognizing Jane Tigar, Michael's wife and co-counsel of more than 2 decades. Unfortunately, she needed to stay back in North Carolina as she and Michael are dealing with some of the effects of Florence on their home. And we're really appreciative that she's taking on the burden of that so that Michael can be here with us, but we're sad that she is not here as well, so we'll have to find another opportunity. We have a packed program for you. You've shown up to a program. This is going to go from 4 to 7 and then have a reception. So I'll tell you a little bit about how it's going to go. I'll begin with a word about why and how we're fortunate to have received Michael's papers. And then Don Carlton will tell you a bit about the Briscoe Center before we watch a video message that was sent to us by Jeremy Corbin. And then after we hear the message from Jeremy Corbin, our assistant director, Ariel Travis, who's here, and I will show you a very special sneak preview of the papers and the website exhibition of them. And then we'll officially launch later, and you can go home and check it out more fully. So we'll go immediately after that into the roundtable, after which We'll take and that'll be about an hour, and then we'll take a very short bio break, and come back to a reading of one of Michael Tigar's plays that has been adapted by and will be read by two professors in the Department of English, Roger Reeves, who I see back there, and Neville Hode, but you'll see them all at the beginning of the second part. And then that will be followed by the interview with Michael by Lois Romano, and then a reception with toasts from a number of very special people. Now, truthfully, we didn't originally plan to cram so much into this. Don and I were like, oh yeah, an afternoon, we can do it. But then everyone we invited said yes. So we weren't actually planning to have this many people. It's a fantasy come true, but it's really amazing. People have come very long distances, like from Mauritius, and are traveling long distances afterward to be here today, and I know many folks in the audience as well. And I think that in and of itself is one of many testaments to Michael that you will witness today. So, without further ado, let me say a little bit about why we have the papers. When I first met Michael in person, which was much more recently than most of you, I imagine, it was only about 5 years ago, I told him about some projects that the Rapoport Center had done, not only to collect papers of human rights advocates, but to bring them to life, and make them accessible to a variety of people, and in part by making them more interactive and adding interviews with the people and others who knew them. And I asked him if he had any plans for his own papers, and he told me, as I recall, that he didn't really have any papers. And then went on to say, well, everything would be attorney-client privilege, so I just can't really turn it over. And it was a relatively casual conversation, and I let it drop, even while leaving the door open, of course, to talk about it someday. But those of you who know Michael know that just because you kind of let something drop doesn't mean he does. So I don't know exactly when he began the project of going meticulously through his materials, as he insisted on calling them early on. I saw some old emails, rather than papers, because he thought papers was too pretentious, but he's gotten over that. We're calling them papers now. But the first few emails were a few materials here and there. And I did look back and see that he actually mentioned them in a few emails, but they were always in emails about something else. And then there was a little, and I might be sending you that flash drive. And I didn't really know what that flash drive was that he was referring to, frankly. I mean, I knew he was working on the papers, and maybe he'd send them and see if I had an idea about somebody who might be interested. I think it was sort of like that. And then one day I opened up an envelope, and there was indeed a flash drive. And you have to open up the flash drive to see what incredible stuff is in there. And I walked around with it, and I would peek, and I would show some bits to other people, and I thought, I hope he didn't send me the only copy. And then I was a little confused because it was a flash drive with digitized images on it. So I called him up, and I said, but that's great. I think there'd be a lot of people interested in it. Where are the originals? Thinking, I can't go talk to Don until I have some original paper. And Michael responded that he had simply burned them all. Originals were gone. And so we said, okay. I went to Don anyway, and we said we can work with that. And actually, it was really great. We didn't have to digitize anything. It was all already digitized. But then over time, it turned out a few things were found. And I started getting some stuff in the mail. And then there would be more things, attachments by emails. I'm sure we don't have them all. And I thought, I'm out of my league. And also, I can't preserve these papers. I mean, the Rapoport Center, we can put it online, but we're not archived. We can't do what it really needs. And so I then called Don Carlton back up and said, well, I think there's even a little bit more, but we need to figure out how to deal with this, and we need to do something. And Don, I said, needed to be, and he agreed, the person to do it. And that's because Don Carlton is the director of the most appropriate archive, not just at the University of Texas, but I actually think anywhere in the world, to house Michael Tigar's papers. The digital papers, if that's all we had, but also the physical papers, which we do have some of, as well as a number of us, Jordan Steiker and Gerald Torres and I interviewed Michael for a couple of days, and we have an oral history, and that's being housed at the Briscoe Center. There's snippets of it on the archive, but not all of them. So it's my pleasure to ask Don Carlton, an accomplished and award-winning historian and author of many works. One of them has the title Red Scare, or the words Red Scare in the title, which has to do with why he has the perfect archive for this. And he is the executive director of the Briscoe Center, which used to be called the Center for American History. Some of you might know it. He's been the director of it from the beginning. And it does house papers of the likes of Bernard Rapoport, Sissy Farenthold, John Henry Falk, Maury Maverick, and many more. So I'll let Don talk to you about that. Thank you, Don.
Karen, thank you very much for that introduction. You know, it reminds me, I was in East Texas a few years ago, and your introduction reminded me of this. And I had to give a speech at a Luby's cafeteria. It's a little bitty town in East Texas. And at any rate, the mayor was supposed to introduce me, and I didn't know anybody got sick before I got there. And so I pulled up in front of the Luby's, and the sheriff, the county there, pulled up in front of my car and got on this, radio, and was staring at my license plate. And I didn't think anything of it. So anyway, I got out of the car and went into the Luby's to give my talk. Turns out that the sheriff was invited there to give my introduction. You did a much better job. He got up and said, "Well, I only know two things about today's speaker. One of them is he's never spent any time in a penitentiary in Huntsville, Texas. The other is I don't know why." Michael, I stole that story from John Henry Falk, who undoubtedly stole it from somebody else, but we'll talk about it. No, it's a great honor, Michael, that we're serving, that the Briscoe Center is serving as a home of your archival collection, your papers. And I want to thank you really sincerely, Michael, for entrusting them to our care. It's a great honor for us. We're also delighted, of course, to be working with our partners, Karen Engle and the Rapoport Center. As you know, I have had an association with the Rapoport family for more than 30 years, and so that always is something that attracts me to this, but working with you is a joy as well. And I'm very impressed also with the work that's been done on this website, and I'm very excited for you to show that later on. Michael, as Karen mentioned, and I'm very biased on this, but Michael's papers have found a very good and appropriate home. And as you already mentioned, some of the collections that we have. Oh, I should mention before I get any long. I always assume everybody knows where the Briscoe Center is, and of course I'm always wrong. And so we are located here on this campus, and we're located adjacent to the LBJ Library. So we're on the far eastern end of the campus, right off of Red River. We run 3 museums out of Austin, but that's our main facility here on campus. And we have an archive, a rare book library, map collection, the usual things you would expect to find in a history research center. And our collections also include, Karen, I'll add, C. Wright Mills's papers, Dr. James Farmer's papers, Molly Ivins' papers, Ramsey Clark's papers, the Texas Observer archive, and, of course, as I've already mentioned, John Henry Falk, and as Karen mentioned. And John Henry's papers include the legal files for Falk versus Aware, Louis Niser's legal file. He gave us his entire collection of that lawsuit. And that lawsuit, for those of you who probably aren't aware of this, Falk versus Aware was the lawsuit that Louis Niser tried for John Henry Falk that he won, and he broke the blacklist in the radio and television industry as a result of that case. But we have all of the files. So it's one of the best collections in existence, really documenting that there was a blacklist, because as you know, Michael, the industry always denied that there was such a thing. So also I want to mention Michael. I met Michael in 1989, and what made me think of this was talking about John Henry Falk, because I met Michael at John Henry Falk's house in 1989. It was in the spring of '89. I think you were still teaching here at that time. And Michael came over to invite John Henry to come to Managua, Nicaragua, to help celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Sandinista Revolution. And John Henry asked me to come over and meet with you. And that's when we met. And that's what started the whole expedition, which I may write a book about someday, to Nicaragua with John Henry Falk for that event. It was an incredible experience. Anyway, so that's when I met you, Michael. So Michael's papers, as a historian, obviously, you know, the kind of things that we absolutely depend on to write history, to reconstruct and understand history in the best way that we possibly can, is that we have to have the records. We have to have evidence. And just like we're in a courtroom here, just like law, you have to have evidence as a historian. Otherwise, you just make it up, and I guess that also happens occasionally as well. But we do depend on the evidence, and the evidence is in the archives. So that's essentially our job, is to gather the evidence of the past. And, you know, historians don't always do a great job at it, but we do depend on the evidence. So, Michael, your papers are absolutely critical for any understanding of the many things that you've been involved in your career, and the processes and personalities and events. So that's one of the reasons why we're so happy to have them, but we're also delighted to be associated with you in this way. So, Michael, thanks again for your trust and your confidence in us, and thank you for your gift of your papers. Karen?
So I'll sit here for a moment because I did say no one turned us down, and that includes the Right Honorable Jeremy Corbyn. In fact, we invited him to send a video message, and he wrote back. His people wrote back. He said he wanted to try to make it, which wasn't actually what we had invited him to do. So turned out, though, they had conference this week. He couldn't make it, but he was very happy to send the video message that gives you a little bit of background of Michael's life. So we thought it would be a good way to start.
I'm Jeremy Corbyn, leader of the Labour Party in Britain. I'm sorry I can't be with you today to celebrate Michael Tigar's incredible career and the launch of this website to archive Michael's papers. This archive will be a vital resource for academics and activists equally. No doubt I'll be using it myself. I grew up during the Vietnam War. I became a teenager in the 1960s. That war and that decade shaped my politics and made me determined to fight for a fairer world. I saw the activism in America and saw how our struggle is international. That activism included Michael providing legal assistance to young men facing the military draft and his role in the free speech movement. When I received this invite, the first case that came to my mind was Michael's representations of the family of the former Chilean ambassador Orlando Letelier and Ronnie Carpen Moffett, who were killed in a car bomb in the US by Pinochet's junta in 1976. It was a landmark case against the government of Chile that not only meant justice for the families that he represented, but led to families of other victims of the Pinochet regime to seek damages. This month marks the 45th anniversary of the start of Augusto Pinochet's ghastly military coup. I was in Chile in 1969 when Popular Unity was formed, and I spent many years campaigning for justice for the people of Chile through the Chile Solidarity Campaign. And because of that, in 1998, I met Michael Tigar, and we worked with lawyers from Spain, Chile, and the US to secure Pinochet's extradition to Spain from the UK, where he'd come to seek medical treatment. It was vital that the UK should not serve as a safe haven for Pinochet. There's so many of Michael's cases that I'd like to talk about, and none more so than Michael's relentless role in the Chagos Islands, something I've also campaigned on for many years. Enjoy the roundtable discussions and the interview from Michael. There's so much more we can learn from his life and his career. Michael, I record this message 3 years to the day, almost to the moment, when I was elected leader of our Labour Party. During that campaign, you wrote to me, kindly offering your solidarity and your words of wisdom. I send this message to you, as you ended yours to me, as they equally apply. Keep on, we will do our best on this side of the water. Take care, Michael, all the best, and thanks for everything you've done, do, and will do.
Well, it's a good thing I have more of Michael to show you because I wouldn't want to have to try to match that. But images of him can match it. So I also want to thank you, Michael, for entrusting me with that flash drive and continuing to trust us with this project. And the students and others who've worked on the program and on the project, and I feel like I just need to, because they've been in touch with you all. So I want to point out Annie Bears. And Patrick Anna, who they've both been involved in this project in a whole bunch of different ways, but they're both still here, which is great. And Patrick, because it's taken 2.5 years, Patrick's a law student, and Annie is doing her PhD in English literature. And they've both been working overtime after their time at the Rapoport Center ended to make sure that the site came together. And you can blame them for anything you don't like. No, they've really just done an astonishing job. And you'll see as we go through some of the decisions that had to be made, and I'll say something about that. But one of the things is that I know at least Annie wrote a few times because she would ask questions about the history or an incident, and I wouldn't know, and I'd be like, well, Michael will answer. Just write Michael. And you've been so generous to all of us in providing more and more information and stories and trying to keep the evidence, to expand upon the evidence in important ways. So, this website is a result of Patrick and Annie have been amazing, but they would say they're part of a team, and there have been not just several teams, or not just several people in the team, but several teams over the period of years. It was done by not just law students, but also graduate students in literature as well as in history, and undergraduate students also studying in a variety of fields. And I say that because they were all studying human rights, and it was really fun to watch them learn about you, Michael, and your career, and to take in the many, many lessons, substantive and procedural, theoretical and practical, moral and legal, and historical and contemporary that are embodied in these materials. So we've also, so we've been fortunate to have those in the materials and then also to be able to learn them from you. So as I said, at the end of the program, we'll have a ceremonial launch. But now, Ariel Travis, our assistant director, and I will give you a soft launch. So what are these papers? What is this website? Even Jeremy Corbyn hadn't seen it yet. But we want to show you. You can't tell anyone yet. It's just for this room. But to make it a little more concrete and to help you work through it, navigate through it, we want to show it to you. So, 1, 2, 3. Ta-da! When Michael sent us the archive, it was unbelievably organized. That shouldn't surprise any of you either. And it was organized mostly by the decades. And so Ariel is going to be scrolling on the screen so that to show you kind of what's in there as I talk. So we expanded upon each of those classifications by assigning each document a primary issue. And we sort of came up with the ones that we thought that they best fell under, and then we redid it many times, right, Patrick? And it was like a chess game, and or really more like a puzzle, and a jigsaw puzzle, because every time you move something, something else. I guess that's dominoes. Something else sort of fell down, and so you know it looks natural. Of course, those are the things that he worked on. I can't see it from here, but civil liberties, Vietnam, the death penalty, international human rights, labor capital, etc. But actually, a lot of work went into that, and part of why it's so difficult also is because for Michael, so many of those issues were interrelated, and he said in the oral history that that's one of the reasons he likes to be called a human rights lawyer, because then he doesn't have to divide it in that way. But we didn't want you to open it up and have 350 documents you had to sort through or know what decade something happened in. So that's how we've categorized them. And we also added a category which is type. And that's because it turns out that Michael didn't just send some correspondence and some documents, but he sent all types of things. He does a lot of different types of things. And so they're not only books and journal articles in there, but they're also oral arguments, for example, that were made before many courts, including the Supreme Court. Those are under audio. There are plays, so maybe you didn't know that Michael Tigar wrote plays, but he did, and they're on there, and you'll hear part of one. There are radio scripts. He was very involved in radio in the 60s. There's a wealth of those. The radio scripts are terrific, actually, and everything I highly recommend to you. So there are also things in there that were produced about Michael. So you'll find newspaper and magazine articles. You'll find the oral history we did with him. You'll find images, some of which were taken by him, but most of them were taken of him. We also, in order to kind of, for people who wanted the quick and dirty, and we thought it was a nice way to have another cut into things, we have a people and places tab. And not everything is on the people and places, but basically if a person or a place appears a number of times in the archive, we put them there. I'll say Fernando Chavez, who you'll hear from in a moment, and Deborah Meeks, who you'll hear from later tonight, are on there, as are Chile, South Africa, and other places you'll learn about. There's also a search page. And you can apply a bunch of filters. So if you want to know what letters were written, what correspondence is there from 1960, you can go in and do that. There is a search tool at the very top right of the page, which will start working once we go live and once you all start doing your searches. So we don't want to tell you too much because we want everyone to go home tonight and look up at least 3 items. Because once that starts to get populated, then it'll make it easier for other people to find materials in there. Now, since Michael sent us originally the archive to us by decades, I thought I'd use it as a way to give you, sort of follow that as a way to give you a little bit of a biography of him. And also, this is sort of by way of introduction of the roundtable that's going to follow. So I'm pretty sure that no matter how well you know Michael Tigar, and Michael Tigar himself might be an exception to this, but I'm pretty sure that no matter how well you know him, there will be something that you'll find in the archive, and even something that you'll hear today or see that you might not have known about. For example, you've already heard Jeremy Corbyn talk about some of Michael's activism in the 1960s. And Bernadine Dorn will also revisit that period with us in a bit. But I bet that no one in the discussions we're going to have will mention the 50s. And yet there's a picture from the 50s that we thought might or might not affect people's conceptions of Michael. So I wondered, well, if Jeremy Corbyn had been following Michael in the 1950s, what would he be like today? So that's a particularly good example from the early parts. Michael had a brief foray into politics when he was in high school, and he ran successfully, I should add, for the student body president. I think that was a foray into branding a little bit as well. So Michael spent much of the beginning of the 1960s as an undergraduate and then law student at the University of California in Berkeley, where he was active, as Jeremy Corbyn already said, indeed instrumental in the beginnings of the free speech movement, as well as in the anti-war movement, and in farm labor support movements. And he wasn't shy as a critic, even back then. And satire was often his weapon of choice. So in speeches on radio programs and in writing, he broadened perspectives and he took on what he saw as abuses of power by the government. And he often did so in satirical ways. Do I have to? A cable Carl to the top of the marks. Michael's first early moment of fame was not unrelated to that. It came when Justice William Brennan rescinded an offer of a clerkship to Michael after extreme pressure from a variety of sources, including the FBI director. And one U.S. congressman read into the congressional record, and we have it here, an editorial warning of a, quote, communistic infiltration of the court itself. And it reads in part, quote, that grand old lady, the Supreme Court, has had some distinguished lions on the bench, but tongues are wagging about a cub that will soon be tucked underneath. And it went on to talk about Michael's commitments to his beliefs. Now, obviously, we can't keep going at this pace, showing you that many items from the 50s from each decade. But I think it's obvious that the Brennan affair didn't ruin Michael's career. Far from it. Michael became a lawyer and a law professor, moving seamlessly between the two of them. And again, as Jeremy Corbyn said, Tigar devoted much of his early years to defending and creating defense strategies for those criminally charged under the Selective Service Act for avoiding the draft. And Fernando Chavez will describe one such case for us. Michael worked for many years off and on, with the highly regarded defense attorney, Edward Bennett Williams, who became his mentor, and whom Wayne Rio will discuss with us a bit this evening. And then, again, as we just heard, Michael brought the successful lawsuit against the government of Chile in the Letelier and Moffat case. And you can find a picture in the archive with him and Isabel Letelier, the widow of Orlando, and an activist in her own right. And that's really the connection, I want to say, between the Rapoport Center and Michael all these years later, is that Michael was on the faculty at the time, and he donated his attorney's fees in that case to an endowment that funds students to work in human rights over the summer. And the Rapoport Center has been administering that endowment since we began in 2004, and we've been able to access nearly $100,000 to fund over 30 students who have been Letelier Moffat Fellowship recipients. And so in the oral history, and there's a shot from the oral history that we won't listen to, but just to give you a sense of the kinds of things that are in there, which are edited clips taken from the larger interview. Michael actually offered some advice to those students. So if any of you is in here, you'll want to go listen to it, and others might find something in it as well. So in the late 1980s, while Michael was on the UT faculty, he went to South Africa, and he trained ANC lawyers, which Bernardine will tell us a little bit more about. He also began to work on death penalty cases, and he's best known perhaps in those terms for his representation of Terry Nichols, which some folks will discuss during the toast tonight. But Jordan Steicher will also talk about some death penalty cases in which Michael was involved with students at UT that were perhaps less successful, but incredibly important cases that he took on. Oral arguments of those latter ones are in the archive. Also in the archive, there are many, many profiles that have been written about Michael over the years, and a lot of them actually were around the time of the Nichols trial. Including is one by Lois Romano, who will be interviewing Michael a little bit later today. And where is Lois? Welcome. Finally, and I also want to say that there's a great deal of correspondence around the Nichols trial, including, well, from a wide range of people, from students, former students of Michael's who worked on the case, to Gore Vidal, who mentioned it in a letter that he wrote to Michael about one of his books. So Jeremy Corbin also mentioned the Chagos Islands, which we'll get to learn more about in a few minutes from Michael's former student and colleague in that case, which has been in a whole bunch of different jurisdictions, and that's Robin Martamutu. And I did want to say that there are only a few items in the archive on the many, many challenges that they've raised together on the Chagos Islands and with the Chagosians. So I want to invite Robin to help us expand that perhaps at some point, and others as well. So, I mean, I want to say this is a work in progress, so it's great that you all are here witnessing it, and undoubtedly some of you will have some materials that maybe Michael doesn't have. The last image I want to show you can be found in correspondence. And as I've already suggested, with the reference to Gore Vidal, there's in the students, there's a lot of really great correspondence in the archive. And before I show you this last one, I'll say you can also search for Brennan when you get home, and you'll see the letter that Justice Brennan wrote to Michael many years later about the experience. We call it the Brennan. It's called the Brennan affair, but about the rescission of the clerkship. But I don't want to show you everything, but I will show you this one. So the last one is a letter from Fidel Castro. And Bernadine will tell us a little bit about where the fine specimen of a bull that gets talked about in this letter came from. But maybe I need to read to you a translation of the letter for those who can't make it out. So, and it's sort of some technical language. So the first paragraph is full of both shame for not having written sooner and a lot of gratitude. And the second is, as you may know, the bull Phoenix that you sent us arrived in Cuba in good condition after various long and inevitable periods of quarantine. His state of health is satisfactory, he's adapting favorably, and we think that he will soon be in adequate condition to enter into production. I think that he'll be a contribution of great value for the development of our herd of Santa Gertrudis, which we give the utmost care and will sire many high-quality animals. I'm aware of all the effort and hardship involved in the act of getting a stud of this quality to our country. And because of this, while your gift is of incredible value, what is still more valuable and more important for us is your gesture of friendship and kindness. Believe me when I say I feel a profound and sincere debt of gratitude towards you. And I have to say, I found the letter funny in a bunch of ways, and then I talked to Michael about it, and reading the sincere gratitude and the importance of the bull stock, he'll tell you about it. But I also think there are other stories, and Bernadine will tell us a little bit about maybe where that stud came from. But Michael got around. He gets around. And there are many, many more treasures, and I look forward to seeing what you find. So with that, we'll go to the round table now.